and you have receivers. And before, when we talk about the symmetric key, we said miraculously a key showed up, right? Miraculously a key was drawn from distribution. And that came from a priori communication. How they do it is as shown, right? So suppose we have no such mechanism of an a priori agreement. Because now we know, once you have this key, then once you have pseudo-random number generator, you can keep on going, right? The most important thing in secure communication is to get the key agreement, right? The rest, the pseudo-random number generation, will just continue to push forward, right? So key exchange was essentially introduced in such a setting, saying that imagine that these two players suddenly decide to talk still on the public channel, right? And we already have pseudo-random number generators, right? So they agreed upon pseudo-random number generation because this is just public knowledge, right? They can just even in public channel to say, let's use the following pseudo-random number generator, right? But nevertheless, they have to essentially have a key emerged so that they agree, and it's very hard for the attackers to discover the key. Or also, even further, they want this key to be, for example, everyone wants to be random. They don't want the other side to dictate the key, right? So this basically defines it as a key exchange problem. That is, you have a public channel, you have two players. They want to agree upon a key so that the attacker cannot get that key, and neither of them can somehow completely govern the key. Which means if one person decides to go uniform, then it will be uniform. Right? So you can't get it, one person always say, I will choose specialized key, it's good for me to for other purpose. Okay? So this basically sounds loosely like a key exchange problem. Usually we call pairwise key exchange problem. Namely, this is a key exchange between two people. Okay? So this problem was first, one of the earliest protocol is still the one which actually today even used in the internet when people do the secure access sometimes without using public key. It's called Diffie-Hellman exchange. So they came up with this very elegant protocol for such key exchange. At that time, we don't overly conduct the proof. It's really rely on number theoretical hardness of discrete log. So they use the discrete log. And this protocol was developed before actually the modern public key, and it's really initiate the modern public key. Okay? So what today I'm going to quickly give the Diffie-Hellman exchange protocol, and it's very interesting once public key is developed, and when they look back, they always think that this clearly is the closest to public key ever before public key. And for a long time, actually, people had a hard time to design public key look like key exchange. And that only happened in '85, which means after RSA is already almost 10 years old. Right? So it's really the development of probability encryption somehow initiated another protocol. And this one I will also discuss, called algorithmic public key. And the one thing nice about algorithmic public key is that it can be used to define upon not just on numbers, but also on any group structure. Right? So that's actually expanded the mathematical structure that public key is built upon. Right? Remember, for pseudo-random number generations, we said that the push eventually all the way pushes them to one-way function. And algorithmic scheme at least push a lot of scheme out of number theory. It's basically went to just a group structure. Okay, so Diffie-Hellman scheme is actually very simple. It's built upon a discrete log, which let me set up again. It's a generation function, just like before, we always have a generating process to produce certain random distributions. And then afterward, we try to define protocol, right? So the generation process generates a large prime. So generates a larger prime. So that's the first step. And come with a larger prime, which means is defined dp or dp star, right? So those are the two algebraic structures defined. And the dp star has a special property because p is a prime. Namely, dp star is cyclic. Which means it has a generator. Such that dp star is just equal to g0, g1, g p minus 2. So this is the mathematical structure of dp star. And this gives rise to the basic discrete log problem. That is, imagine I compute h equal to g to the x, and I give you h as input, I ask you to get x. Right, so basically on input, so let me write down here to call discrete log. So input h and g and p, output x such that gx is equal to h. So this is the discrete log problem. That is, I gave you a number, and you want to find the exponent based upon g. Okay, so this is a discrete log, and up to today, no one knows how to solve discrete log, even against primes in polynomial time. So this is a widely open question. Do people believe this is in polynomial time? It really depends on who you ask. Actually, this again is a problem in quantum computer is broken. Right. Not only factoring is broken, this is also broken. Right. So somehow group structure didn't survive the quantum analysis. Right. So that's really some, in some sense, very special about quantum access of information. It did kill a lot of symmetries somehow in the process. Right. And but on the other hand, if you really think about this, technically we really don't need a larger prime. That's why it's produced eventually to the group theory. Is that technically you can build up any group, you just need to choose an element that has a large order, so that you can use its subgroup, G1, G0, G1, until it's become cyclic. And you can use that group structure essentially to redefine anything which I'm writing on the board. So that's why one can replace this just as a generic group, and this just as a element normally because who has larger order, which means you can power it for a very long time before it hits back. Right? So if you use this cyclic subgroup inside the bigger group, then everything I said is the same thing. There's no difference in running this. Okay? So this is a discrete log. And Diffie-Hellman's key exchange went through this very cute protocol. It's probably one of the most elegant protocol defined in the field. So they go as the following, that, so this is generation process, this is all the preparation process, right? So when they agree upon, basically, they agree upon, this is all public information eventually. You don't need this is not privately computed. There's no public or private information here. It's just all public information. So which means on the public channel, they discuss, they figure out the larger prime, and then they work out with the generator. And usually, for example, back then certain organizations publish larger prime generators. Okay? And so once they agree upon this algebraic field, then they conduct the following key exchange protocol. So it did the following. Independently, so this is still inside the box now, okay? I will draw this as the private box, the private computer. And whenever I draw this line, it will be they're talking to each other. So privately, they generate random x, compute hs equal to gx mod p. And simultaneously, this player generates a random y and compute hr equal to gy. Okay, so this is done privately. So which means that the sender only knows x, and the receiver only knows y. For now, okay. So this is how what I earlier said. If one person needs to want to randomize, it will be randomized eventually. It becomes clear that they have essentially symmetric power in governing the distribution of the key. Okay? And so as a communication step, this player just release hs, and this player just release hr. So this you can say I talk to each other, or you can just put in the public domain. Right? Because the attacker is assumed that you can listen to the channel of communication. And that's all the communication done between two players. Right? So the intuitive assumption here is that discrete log is hard. Discrete log is hard, and intuitively releasing hs still keep x as private data. Releasing hr still keep y as private data. So there's no, this is like a one-way function, you can't quite recover x and y. Right? So this comes from so-called hardness. Depend on, we can write down formally, just like we have been for a long time. Right? You can write down such assumption. And so then what is the key? The key come out to be very simple. They just locally compute. When you receive hr here, you just simply set the key to be hr to the power x mod p. And here you can set k equal to hs to the power y mod p. So the key observation mathematically is that those are actually indeed the same k. It's not I made a mistake to see the two different k, because if you really look at this k is equal to g to the y to the power x mod p. So it's equal to g to the xy mod p. Right, because they commute. And here again, k equal to g to the x to the power y mod p. So it's equal to g to xy mod p. So you can see this is how the secrets are composed, right? So by sending this, it helps to compose with this random string. Right. So intuitively, this is almost as good as doing the following, right? So remember that one way, for example, in the private, suppose we do key exchange, nobody wants to govern, is that I will produce random string and you produce random strings. Suppose it's all in private. Then we should do the exclusive war of bits. That's one of the privately done key exchange, right? If none of us want to govern. So I just randomly choose a string, you randomly choose a string, which is a bitwise exclusive OR. And this essentially is an emulation of that protocol, as you can see. Right? So that's why that is really the baseline protocol in their head when they produced it. So what they said is that technically what they want to do is that instead of doing bit OR, they want to do x times y. But they said you can't do x times y. they have trouble to actually even compute x times y. But they have no trouble to compute in such a language that g to the power x times y. Right? So, so if you really think about this, this in some sense as random as just the bit operation and so on, because algebraically, if I choose a random element at raising a power, what does it mean? It literally means I choose a random element here. So which means this is uniform at random still. Right? G to the x, if x is random, it's totally random here. Just like g to the y, if random is totally random here. You can also prove if one of them is random, this will be just random uniform distribution here again. Right? So that's why you just need one player to be uniform, the whole thing will be uniform. Okay? So this is the famous Diffie-Hellman protocol, and I think they won Turing Award largely because this and the conceptual development of public key. And this is also partially, you can see, getting very close on the edge of public key, because, so let me just add one more sentence about eventually mathematically set up the hardness analysis. So essentially, what we usually call Diffie-Hellman discrete log assumption is that you can't compute x or y built upon these two pieces of data. And you cannot compute gxy built upon these two pieces of data. So namely, if you look at public data, is a p, g, gx, gy. And the hardness result said it's hard to get gxy. So this is the assumption used in Diffie-Hellman. So those are great days, right? You can build a protocol, then you said, under my assumption, my protocol is secure. Those are good old days. Right? Under my assumption, my protocol is secure. But they have to make assumptions that at least are appealing to a certain hardness result. Okay. So later on, people try to strengthen the claim and they make much tighter, at least more narrowed, believe what they assume. Okay. So you can see that the hardness comes from the assumption that it's hard to take a discrete log, and also it's hard to get a correlation between those numbers. So this, to a larger degree, I think initiate Diffie-Hellman thinking about so-called public key, right? This clearly is motivated by symmetric key scheme. So that's why you can see many things are indeed rooted at the desired communication between just pair of players, right? So initially you said that if I, almost like pseudo-random number generation, if I give you some secret moment to agree upon, then afterward you can communicate. Then people basically say that's too cumbersome, we want to communicate regardlessly, right? That's why you can see the field moved on and naturally introduced the problem called key exchange, right? Because once you put up here, the main question is how do you get the key, right? So to a larger degree, that initiates the definition of key exchange, right? And remarkably, the first protocol just is clean. It's beautifully done, right? But they are really just emulate the computation of xy, or x is close to y. So basically, they emulate such computation, right? So technically, x plus y is also good. It just they're not able to get those going. Clearly, there might be certain try and error for them to come up. This is even true, right? Because they all random if one of them is random. They all random if one of them is random. Any questions up to here? Right, so this is how public key started. And after key exchange, Diffie-Hellman began to conjecture maybe we have public key. Because in their mind, this is almost like public key already, right? It's just before we talk, we have to train each other a little bit, right? From this definition of public key, just in one asymmetric way now, right? Remember, public key is about I define my own language, people can talk to me. And here, still is we define a common language that we can talk to each other, right? And partially, they consider public key encryption scheme is mostly out of efficiency of many players' communication, right? So before, basically, all the motivation, like the military combat, is all about a small group of people want to talk in the universe. And modern days become very clear, like telephones and all those things are no longer just the military talk to each other. We all want to talk to each other. And everybody wants a certain degree of privacy and security, right? So that's clearly initiate such a desire that whether publicly people can do such a thing if they want, right? And but if you look at key exchange protocol, it's to a certain degree less efficient. The key exchange protocol, because if you have two players to talk, you just have one key. So here you have one key. But if you have three players to talk, then you have three keys. Everyone has to keep three keys, right? And in general, when you have n players to talk, they need to maintain n choose two keys, right? If you want to have a system that everyone occasionally may call them each other, then you need to produce a lot of keys. And everyone has to remember all the keys of their friends whenever they make communication. So that's why they declare that is not very efficient.
But like, following this one,
yes,
you just need to remember the others. You don't care about whenever one other than you is communicating with someone else.
Oh, no, but the main thing, you have to produce yours differently for different people. Otherwise, people can break it.
Produce n.
So you need to at least maintain n key. That's what I'm saying. Each individual need to remember n keys still.
Yeah, so not 2 power n.
Oh no, the system has.
System.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But everyone has their own system. So
yeah, everyone need to retain n minus 1 keys. The system need to n choose 2, but in the public key, everyone maintain just their own keys. So which means that this is done as the minimum as possible, right? No one maintain. You don't even need to maintain any other key if I want to talk to you, right? Because all I need is to look at what you put in public. So which in some sense, no, we just keep our own private key, that's all. Right? So the public key really gave this most efficient information system, right? I have a private key. When people want to talk to me, they talk to me, I run my private key out, I put the private key in my ears, I understand. Right? But in this case, it's not true, right? Because when people talk to me, they have to use our commonly agreed keys, right? So you have to create n choose 2 languages. The public key, you only create n language, one for each person. It's personalized language. So this is a pairwise language. For every pair, you have language, right? But they have to conduct this key exchange. Right? So is this a lack of efficiency? So you can see it's really, so that's why I want to keep on saying development, both technology and ideas, or in research, essentially often are incremental, but suddenly lead to fundamental paradigm shifts, right? So that's why sometimes the concerns are very rudimentary, right? And also, one of the fundamental jokes about what we call capitalism is, it really move what is luxury into necessity, right? So in some sense, once you have, then you're looking for more efficiency, right? Because suddenly, people say, this is great. Everyone can talk to each other privately. Then still someone say, well, wait a minute, it's too expensive. We don't want to remember that much, right? So you can see each of those actually fundamentally push the field forward, right? It's a good question sometimes, right? So that's why at the beginning, we just want to talk privately. We are even willing to make assumption that we produce our own keys before we talk, right? So then, situation arises, particularly in public communication, Then people say, we want to talk when we don't have such a moment. We just want to talk. So that's why the key exchange was proposed as a minimum response to such a demand, right? That in public we can talk, nobody can understand us. Is that first we agree upon a language, then we talk, right? So then basically, this is a luxury, right? Then it becomes a necessity. People want to talk this way. Then they said, if we don't want to talk this way, then I have to keep so many keys, so many earphones sticking into my ears, and it just look confusing. I couldn't keep track of it anymore, right? So this basically lead to the next desired property. That is, can you have just one earphone put in your ears, and you just walk around, whoever wants to talk to you, they shout in that language you understand. Right, that's eventually the saturation of public key. Right, so it's utterly designed for distributed environment. Right, untrusted distributed environment involving many people, multiple parties. Right, so this is a fundamental push from this very elementary design of secure communication. Right, and it pushed into pseudo-randomness, public key exchange, and so on. Right? So under this, it's just as academic curiosity at that time, it has been asked multiple times, this must be good enough to build a public key. Because in some sense, build a quasi-public key. Right? And this is this very elegant work of Algorithmic. He said, actually, you can really realize public key this way too. Okay. So here's Algorithmic scheme. Just like all the public key scheme, you need to generate keys at the beginning. So he will also generate P, large prime. He will also generate G, a large a generator. Then he will do the following. So this I will write down public key eventually. And then let me write down the private key first, then I will give you the public key. So the private key is defined to be P and G. So eventually we can erase what is private and public. Then it produces a random X. And then it computes G to the X mod P. So I will just write G to the X now, right? It's all mod P, we don't have to. I'm not going to keep on writing that. It's just easier to write this way. G to the X. And then he said, let's put the G to the X here. And just keep everything as private. Only this thing is private. Okay, so this is the Algorithmic scheme. So in some sense, it's emulated here, right? It's emulated discrete log. It's a one-way function that when I release. So that's why you can see why one-way function continues to show up. And it gives people a lot of taste of one-way function. And eventually, it's so strong that people can prove it gives you pseudo-random number generator. Right? So it took a while for people to figure out what is one-way function, how do you define it, how do you harness the randomness, the hardness from it. Then eventually, that is allow you to squeeze out random bits. Right? So you can see this is that development. And here, they use one-way function essentially to produce the public key, private key pair, right? That's the earliest time to think about how one-way function showed up in the discussion, right? Because whenever you want to go public key, in some sense, from the private key to public key should be one-way function, minimally. Right? Because otherwise, what's the point? Right? Minimally, from private key to public key is a one-way function. Right? So this is where one-way function becomes such essential theory for such a development, right? Because almost every protocol you design, somewhere is a one-way function embedded in, right? So this is where one-way function shows up. Okay. So Algorithmic said, let's just use it to set up, and then he would like to use the Diffie-Hellman key exchange as part of public key. And this is heavily motivated after Goldwasser, Mikami probabilistic encryption. So this after this problem. So that's why it's you can see one development initiate a lot of thought process. Remember this one we did in the class? What I call is invisible inks. They use quadratic residue to write these invisible inks, then people just write this message with the invisible inks, and when you send over, the people who is not colorblind can read. Right, so that's this encryption scheme. Right? Algorithmic basically look at this, mostly borrowed the probabilistic part. Right? He basically say maybe if we use randomness in the protocol, then we can actually do a public key. Right? But this is also show you that even giants are missing ideas sometimes. Right? If you look at Diffie-Hellman at that time holding both the concept public key and the detailed understanding of key exchange, and still stand at the historical doorstep, and somehow at that junction they fail to realize a public key schema which 10 years later somebody else realized. You have to say research is fascinating, right? So that's why each time when I talk to my colleagues and students, and sometimes particular students say, you know, people are working on this for many years, such hard open questions. What is my chance if everybody else didn't solve the problem? But if you look at the field, every generation solves open questions. Never stopped them, right? In part because the knowledge base changed, and people had a very different schema to think. So that's why I think during Diffie-Hellman's time, even though they deal with pseudo-randomness, random numbers, all those things, but randomization as an algorithmic tool is not that fluent yet, right? So that's why it takes actually a few more years to push into probabilistic encryption, because for a very long time, I think it just, a lot of time, once the key is set, somehow we feel like we should just deterministically map the message, right? I think that's a limited creativity, clearly, at that time. And then someone said that we can use randomness in the encryption, suddenly we can create these beautiful inks, right? That can trigger people to revisit some of the classical scheme and some of the classical concepts, right? So this is one thing which I often use as an example, is that decisively I knew even giants miss ideas. Particularly, the giant who created all those components still miss that construction, which is just, you know, it really shows the opportunity for research and every generation. Okay, so here is a schema. It's so simple, and I'm sure when they see it, they just clearly see this is just beautiful. They missed, right? So here is basic schema. What is encryption? So encryption, in algorithmic sense, is a key exchange, right? He said, so what is encryption? Encryption, what's the most ideal way to encrypt? Is it to one-time pad. One-time pad I use generically, right? Namely, either you can do bit exclusive OR or you can do a multiplication, right? Remember, in discrete log, we're talking about potentially you add, multiply, and exclusive OR, some can be realized. But they all just random permutation of numbers, right? So that's just for the understand. You don't have to do a bitwise this thing. You can multiply them, mod something, or you can even raise the power to do something, right? So in algorithmic sense, he said, what is encryption? Encryption is just a mask. You want to mask your message with a random number. Then when you give that the mask saying out, can people read it? No, because it's masked, right? So then he said, what is decryption? Decryption, you have to unmask that, right? So somehow you're able to lift off the mask, and you can see the native bits in the original domain, right? So he did exactly just like that. He said, so suppose you have message. They want to encrypt this message, right? So what is the message? M just belong to the P star, right? Because this clearly, if you want to use discrete log, this is where you are, right? This is my message. So how do you mask this message? you multiply by a random number. Right? So which random number to multiply? He said, you know, since I already did figure out how to do this thing, he said you should just mask by gy times n. And choose y randomly. So if I give you this, is this a random number? I perfectly masked it, right? Because this killed the total dependency of m, right? Because I multiply m with any random number in mod p, this is all mod p, it just give me a random number, right? So this is perfectly secure so far, right? There's no insecurity in this statement yet. Perfectly secure, right? Then he said, what is the communication? I have to help my, eventually, the private key need to unmask this, right? But if I just give you this, the private key cannot unmask this either because, you know, someone just multiply random number against a number. How do you unmask it, right? You can't unmask it. He said, let me give you a little bit help. Right? He just said, let me give you a little bit help. So this is called help. This is called mask. And is this right way to spell? Somehow, sometimes when I stand closer, they don't look like the word mask. Right? Mm-hmm. Let me not use the help. Let me use hint. I think that's probably a better way to describe the scheme, right? He said, I offer you a hint. I give you a mask. That is a private language. And somehow you understand the hint. That's why you can solve the problem, right? So he said, what hint I will give to you? He said, you know, I will just give you, what hint to give to you? Right? What hint to give to you? So this guy, decoding, let's just figure out how decoding will do. Then we can do. I want to make this to be a design issue right now, right? That's why I want to do openly here, just step by step, right? So the idea is very simple, right? Mask hint, and then somehow this guy can take the hint, then nobody else can see the hint. Take the hint. You want to make the hint is takeable, right? Okay? So what this guy has, this guy deep down has gx. Right, so this guy already has gx. Right? And not only this guy has gx, it also has x. Right? So remember, Diffie-Hellman said the best way to do is to do that thing, right? So that's why I would like to eventually modify here to see, right? So that's why I want to change this a little bit, right? So intuitively, you want to do a key exchange. Namely, you don't want to mask by this, because otherwise nobody can unmask it, right? Because you can't stick this one here, people can divide it out. He said, really clever things, I really want to do a mask the thing. It's not using this idea, right? It's just my start. I want to mask this way, but can't do it. I want to mask it with g, x, y. Right. So you can see in the public key, I already want to exchange with your gx. So this means the public key is help you to learn my language, to define my language. He said, why don't I just define for you? I just put this one here. Gx. So this is your public key, right? So this is one of your public key. Let's call the, let me just call this k right now, right? Let's just call this k. This is k raised in power y. So what is this number? So I use gxy to mask. So Diffie-Hellman said, let's exchange the keys. So I should give you here g to the y. This is the encryption scheme. So that's how I give you step by step he's thinking. First, he just want to mask that. He knew he couldn't remove it. Then he said, let's mask for a better one, namely the one we agreed. So which means he treat public key as an attempt to agree on a key. So that's why I offer you a GX. And then you randomly, for every communication, I just run, so this is why randomization somehow showed up, right? For every communication, I do a key exchange with you, per communication. So you bring the burden down into the communication device, right? I generate a random number y. So this is probability encryption, right? Because it becomes probability. I exchange it with you, and I mask the message. Agree? So in the decryption, which means when you receive Z1 and Z2, let me use a cipher 1, cipher 2. So decryption basically, we will receive a hint and a mask pair. When you decrypt, you have to decrypt the thing, right? When it comes out, this one will just be your C1, and the other one is your C2, right? So technically C1 is just GY, and C2 is GXY, and that. Okay. So this is designed, they call it one-time key exchange, one-time pad. Really clever, right? You just created this for me. I just every time just exchange a key with you, and I do one-time pad. Right. And then he said, how do you decode? Clearly we know how to decode. We take our C1. So C1 is GY. And we just compute GY with C1 to the X. Right? So this technically is equal to GXY. And then I take the inverse of this. This is just GCD. Right? Extended GCD. Then I multiply by C2. Right? Sometimes they write as C2 divided by C1. This is a decryption protocol. Because this number is a GXY. So, and this number is supposed to be GXY times N. It's a mask. It's unmasked. So this is the famous algorithmic scheme, invented 10 years after Diffie-Hellman's announcement of the idea of public key, and many more years after they actually had the key exchange, which is already very popular concept. So, so usually I don't have any witness that, the genius and giant missing ideas. Usually it's very hard to figure out, right? How many ideas Gauss miss? It's not clear. Maybe the thing he missed, he can never think about it, right? But this clearly is someone missed when they think about it, but it doesn't matter, right? Because it's really, they still continue, they essentially paved the way for the modern cryptography, right? So this is how key exchange and randomization. So you can see suddenly different ideas really put together suddenly give you a solution space, right? This algorithmic scheme came from the same assumption, so it's rely on the same assumption of discrete log on key exchange. And this idea mostly combined with probabilistic encryption allow you to do this. And when I began to lecture about zero knowledge proof, you will realize many of those things become to look awfully similar to zero knowledge proof. Right? So that's why it is a lot of times one small thing lead to another small thing, suddenly there's a paradigm shift, phase transition. And then there's other continuous movement, and suddenly it leads to breakthrough in other concepts which people often sometimes take for granted. But because of the historical development, it put them in the frontiers of people thinking again, then I think creativity arises and people solve those problems. Okay. So any question about this? This is as fast as I'm going through protocols, right? You can see, right? So in almost no time, I'm going through a protocol right now. So this is how much I actually very advanced after a lot of tedious lectures, right? How quickly. And we can perceive essentially how assumption, eventually, if you make proper assumption, how do you precisely tie in this probabilistic language? If I choose random one, what probability you can break through, right? And this clearly is probabilistic encryption. It actually satisfies a lot of those properties too. Right? Because every time we encrypt, it is a totally different message. Right? So this actually satisfies a lot of these invisible inks. Right? So this is another way to write, create invisible ink each time, basically, right? So this is another way to write invisible inks. They write invisible inks. They give you a toolkit. Eventually, if you have private key, you can create another chemical mix, and when you push on it, you will have the text. Right? So they have text. They have a paint to brush over. They send to you with a little bit mix, and you can mix it with your own things. Then you go there. In old time, that's how people dream about the skill communication anyway, right? How many movies are about this? Right? I think sometimes we use water, sometimes we use oil, sometimes we use what, lemon? It's often used, right? So there's no difference. It's just digital realization of those things, right? Just like our very first lecture, secret sharing is digital realization of logs. This is just digital realization of chemicals, right? It's just the inks.
I have
Okay.
So, like you keep teaching like about RSA and then El Gamal public key and then the other public key. So, but I cannot put them in context. Which one is more secure? If this has meaning, which one is more efficient? Which one is used? Which one?
Right. So the key exchange often used, for example, even these days, when for a lot of servers access. So if you really put it in the human perspective, in part what is driving zero knowledge proof is eventually how the last protocol, right? That gives people a very clear picture. Why need to do zero knowledge proof? That is ATM machine. Okay, ATM machine basically create the last batch, which I'm going to discuss. And so depending on which group you use, that so usually, for example, for algorithm and so on, one does not use the prime group. They use, for example, something called elliptic curves, which is a quadratic cubic equation in modular arithmetics. And there, elliptic curve has some natural group structure, and they even have even better properties. So, for example, if some of you want to do a presentation on so-called pairing on elliptic curve for signature, it's beautiful material. I think that it may benefit the class. Okay, so it will introduce some other algebraic structure, and under which they have a group structure. And there's certain algebraic properties that actually showed up in some early proof of, for example, Fermat's theorem. And they initiate a lot of this algebraic property. Pairing, just pairing thing in the group manipulation is essentially a bilinear form, showed up in some of those analysis, and eventually people harness that to do, for example, authentications, and eventually leading to, for example, obfuscation of software and so on. Right? So it came from this thread, but this thread was largely initiated by two things. One is RSA. From practical analysis, people knew it needed a lot of bits. Typically, RSA need 1,000 of bits, 1,000 to 2,000 bits in modern days. And on the elliptic curve, because of the particular way modular arithmetic and group structure setting. And the modern days of elliptic curve-based encryption scheme, including pairing and authentication scheme, they typically use about a quarter of those bits. So which means your arithmetics are still basically in the hundred of bits rather than thousand of bits. And that actually is far more efficient because a lot of those computations are quadratic or cubic time often. So people may use GPU chips and all those things. So that's why they want to keep the number as small as possible, which means they want to make the algebraic structure as complex as possible with small numbers. Right? Because otherwise we have to do this long multiplication, right? What choice do you have, right? When you need to have a few thousand bits, you have to multiply them. Right? So those need specialized design too. Right? So that's why this wave of development introduced two things. One is people don't want to make assumption just on a few problems. They want to make assumption on bigger problems. Right? So far the most glamorous result, which we kind of pseudo presented, is this pseudo-random number generations. Right? Here we said if you have one-way function, you can do it. Expensive or not, but it's polynomials. I mean, at least, finally you run out of somebody created a new thing people couldn't invert, then you can produce pseudo-random numbers, right? But many other problems, sometimes they do need a little bit additional algebraic structure. For example, for cancellations. Pseudo-random, you just need to keep on going, right? You're using one-way function in this very rudimentary way, right? If you couldn't break, you should just keep on moving forward. But encryption, essentially, normally we call it one-way. Where do I put the one-way? I have something to write down one-way somewhere. One-way. So usually we use called trapdoor. Trapdoor one-way, right? So that's why you can see it asks a little bit more information structure, right? Trapdoor one-way. I guess the best picture is. Some household, they have a garage. Under the garage, they have this little door, and the cat can go in, but raccoon cannot. It's called trapdoor, right? if you not design for it, you can't go in. If you design for it, but one-way function doesn't need trapdoor. It just simply say you can't invert. Trapdoor means that I make it very difficult, but still someone can go in. Right? Is this a little someone can go in, add a little bit of algebraic structures. Right? But for efficiency, fundamentally, the design attempt to reduce the size of integers you will ultimately use. Because when you're doing a lot of this multiplication, every time you encryption, you have to look at RSA. Every time you encrypt, you have to multiply.
There's division.
Right. So you have the power. Power is expensive, right? We have the exponential up. It's just large number keep on multiplying. That's why it's quadratic or cubic time, right? So that's why attempt is to reduce number size, and the algebraic structure like elliptic curve and some other algebraic structure. I don't want to overly play in the class because sometimes it requires more mathematical introduction that I feel is high. Somehow we sacrifice some of what we want to do here, right? But if some of you just just mention elliptic curve and use few of the pairing property to do signature, I think would be beautiful, beneficial. This actually what it did when I was in New York. That pairing was one of the lectures given there. So if you want, I send out somehow. Yeah. So this basically. But the other one is basically you want to have a large body of possible assumption you can use, right? So that's why going from number theory to group theory offer you other platform. And later on, people have encryption scheme built upon some other problem called lattice problem. So lattice problem, which today is only one quantum couldn't beat yet. So what is lattice problem is that you have a few vectors in high dimensions, and you only allow to use integer multiples of those vectors. Right? So for example, you can only write 3v1 minus 4v2 plus 100v3. You can only use integer multiple. You can't use the real numbers, just like all those things, right? They all basically build upon a structure with integers, right? Number theory with integers. Group theory, eventually, is group come from integer to build a group, right? It's just, you don't deal with numbers, you deal with polynomials or deal with some other thing, okay? So then basically, lattice problem is basically, the easy way to drive two-dimensional lattice is just, you have two-dimensional lattice, they will ultimately give you this, right? You can combine this way. You can combine the reverse way. So it gives you those lattice grid point. So one of the hard problems which people don't know how to solve is that in very high dimension, I'm asking you to give me the shortest vector you can ever produce with integer combination. That is very hard, right? So usually what they do lattice-based crypto, again, if some of you want to pick up that, would be wonderful, but one lecture, even though we do at a high level, it's a beautiful type of thing. You can see different mathematical structure people use to build key. And essentially, they will say that when I build public key, I have knowledge of shortest lattice. But since you couldn't compute the shortest lattice or approximate shortest lattice, they're very hard to approximate, then I can define resolution based on shortest vector. So which means I have shortest vector, I can do error corrections around a neighborhood because I define this is my scale. But you have you can only deal with larger vectors, which means your magnified glass is not big enough. So lattice problem is more, I think, physically is more inspired by the magnifying glass, right? That is, you write so small as encryption, right? I don't know whether you know my department, Professor David Kemper, a great character, and a very careful man from Germany. He can write so teeny that when I first came, I had perfect eyes. I can still read it when I go to his office. I just passed my 52nd birthday, so I can't even read the manuals these days in a restaurant. So usually he give me his notebook. It's just nothing, right? So I said, I finally understand lattice-based cryptography. This is lattice-based cryptography. I'm standing here, I can't see anything, but because he has the shortest letters in his eyes, and he can tell the difference between one symbol from the other symbol, right? So that is the other method of encryption. Is you write so small that nobody can decode, right? But you have a specialized magnifier. It's very hard to construct. Then you put in your own pocket. When people write to you, you just teach them how to write small because pen has very small tips. You can write small, but you may not be able to read it. That's why you don't read your own writings, right? And a lot of algebraic structures used, as I keep on using the language of paint and inks, right? Because they really like paint and inks. They philosophically is very similar to design specialized paint and inks, and you can somehow unmask using lemon or water, oil to remove it, right? So it's literally very much like that type of physical process, okay? And but algebraic structure decide on how big integer you need, in general, and the small are often more efficient. Right. So that's why usually we are talking about integer of about 100 to 500 bits. But you need to use some other mathematical structure. But usually with number theory, like RSA, you do today standard is 1,000 bits. Very good question, right? Because and also the proof sometimes there's certain partial weakness in those things can be a problem, right? Because a lot of things depend upon the average case hardness, right? When you think randomized hard. So it's quite different language. Yeah. So those are profound gaps sometimes between theory and practice, as you can see, right? And on top of this assumption use, that's why this is the only beautiful result. Push it to the limit in many ways, right? When we function exists, you can do pseudo-random number generation. Then you can hashing, you can do many other things. Any other questions here? So I hope at least this type of material tie the, because otherwise I feel I'm doing different segment of the modern classical crypto, That's why initially I was planning to do this in between my public key, and so if you look at the class sequence, I have discrete log and put in there, and I move back later on when I was looking at this. I feel it's better to give a lecture separately to pull everything together. So this way we can simultaneously different components that we design. Yeah. Any question up to here? Yeah, so this year when I was in New York, Simon's Foundation, Dan Bonnet from Stanford, he's one of the inventors of using pairing to do signature, and which essentially initiates many new generation of protocol. The bigger surprise is still under heavy mathematical examination right now. It's challenging. Are two things. One is homomorphic encryption. That is, you can manipulate your encrypted data without decrypting them. So it's a sophisticatedly hard protocols, and I usually don't feel, I myself am not expert enough, I don't feel I'm comfortable enough to give very clean lectures. But usually sometimes I have students who give a very high level description, that's part of the project. And the other one is called software obfuscation. But philosophically, you can see if you can do software obfuscation, you essentially solve a lot of modern day cloud computing problems. Okay, so what is software obfuscation? Maybe some of you pick it up later on to give a little bit more detail. Is that you give me a piece of code, right, for whatever project. You give me a piece of code, and then you want to make sure I can't somehow reverse engineering your design from this code. So which means you're not going to give me the piece of code you wrote. You wrote the piece of code, and you want to run through a compiler that produce another code. This code has the same functionality as your code, except when I read it is all garbage. Right? I can't use this new code to reconstruct your initial thought process. Because usually when we write in Java and all those things, if I release, people clearly just know how you do that. Right? They want to obfuscate this to make it as complex as possible. Right? So that information that you can define this notion. So how eventually they define this notion, what do you mean I can't reverse engineer your code? Right? So they said, let me just do the following test. You give me you have a piece of code, and you add one more sentence, has nothing to do with your code. Say, a variable ignore equal to a private number you have. So that's all your program. You have a program, and then you write, ignore equal to some random number, right? That's your code. So then you send this compiler, it will give you a different code. So this code has the same function as this code. Right? It's just called scrambled code. And then basically you ask me the following question. What is X I put in there? Because this has no functionality purpose to this code. But my job is to read the new code to discover what that X is. Right? So if I can't do this, essentially that allow you to design such compiler. Indeed, there's no logical property of this code I can recover. Because in the simplest logic, I couldn't recover. So usually X is either 0 and 1, just like our binary test. If I can't beat by 50% plus epsilon, that which means I really lack knowledge of your program. But if you give me in plain, of course I knew what you write down is 0, 1. Right? So those are sort of powerful concepts people attempt to do for a long time. And recently, this whole wave of so-called multilinear algebraic structures began to give people some sense of attacking such a problem. So there's a certain progress, much more weakness than the encryption scheme. If you call this weakness, That's still rather much weaker. But still people began to come up with protocols that are highly non-trivial. And this is what I call black box, right? This is called a black box program. You literally say, I write the program, you can only put the input and get output, nothing else you get. Right? So those things essentially come from the benefit when people began to initially just looking for algebraic structures that make the integer small. So somehow eventually when people realize you can use other algebraic structures, then they said this algebra has another property. That's why they poke it out, they try to do other things. Right. So those are in some sense are the frontier envelope development, like lattice encryption, essentially try to have a protocol so-called quantum resistant, and other informational protocol, namely protect your software, and homomorphic one is almost like essentially the ideal problem for cloud computing, right? We upload our things into a server, and the server doesn't know what we uploaded, and then we want the server to run something, the server doesn't know what we want to run. Right, so that's why the homomorphic encryption plus the code obfuscation essentially said that you can go to any public server, you upload the encryption scheme, and you write the code, you obfuscate it, you put up there, you said run this code. Right, so the server can only run this code without knowing on what data you're running, and this is why driving Washington crazy, right? Yeah, think about it, right? We are creating a computing device that the government feel very bothered, right? Encryption is something the government feel very bothered because it used to be military communication, and when common people use, if people has power, want to say we have power, we want to know what you want to talk about it, right? It creates a fundamental sort of balance eventually in the society, right? So I think it's a wonderful thing as a mathematician and a computer scientist, right? So, yeah. So this basically give some picture. I try to put things together. I have 25 minutes, so let me just mention one more thing. I actually close the thing I want to mention. This way, without it. So it's called digital signature. So this clearly is another important problem, not much about privacy, but mostly about integrity of data and commitment. Right? So digital signature eventually lead to digital cash. Right? You can see in the cache somewhere signature has to show up, because back then we have check. How many of you ever used a check? You used the check? You guys actually used the check? When was the last time you used the check?
I used to get paid in checks.
Oh no, use meaning you go to the supermarket, you sign a check.
Oh, I don't have a checkbook,
You never sign the check?
Yeah, I pay rent in checks.
You pay rent in check.
Pay my rent in
Even
checks.
today. I
today.
see. Today the rent is still. That's really rent is old school. I forgot. Rent is really old school, right?
And they put fees on online payments.
They put the fees on online payments. You know, every year I got what is bad is when I did my tax return with TurboTax, right? So that basically you said I want to pay, right? So then they said, okay, you can do your deal with your bank to route the money to the government, or you can use your credit card, right? And this is just how evil the thing is. Right? TurboTax said, because on average, you get 3% return when you use credit card. We will charge you 2.89%, for which you still gain 0.11%, right? So then basically, so that's why every time when I have, it created a lot of problems. Every time November came, I have to estimate whether I owe tax or not. Then I just ask the USC to withhold my last paycheck. Okay.
Oh, okay.
And unfortunately, last year I feel like I owe a little bit more tax. I asked them to withhold my entire last paycheck just to pay the tax. And USC system is also so unfortunate. They actually need another explicit update for the next year. They didn't treat us this year. New Year came, and I forgot I did this. And eventually I got an email from parking office saying, we can't deduct parking fee from your paycheck. Then I realized actually I put everything into tax.
Oh.
So until, that's actually happened until March, when parking office, so I asked him how many months I didn't pay parking. He said 3 months.
Oh.
So this year I have to deal with my taxing that, it's I agree with this. But clearly check is one of the, in that generation, I think in 70s generation, the old generation, they actually use checks. You use checks not just in the rental office, they use checks public everywhere, right? Your purse has a check, you can sign it around, right? So what is digital signature? If you think about it. Digital signature is that, just think as a check, right? For documents. You have a document M, and you want eventually a signature here, and you want it to be an integrated document. Right? You want after sign, this thing you can't somehow lift the signature, paste into another thing. So this is really often dangerous. How many times people forge your signature? It's really a problem, right? Forging of signatures. Right, so I'm glad the check is out of the window most of the time now. I haven't had a check with my bank for a long time now. Okay, and so because in the past, it's very hard. You need a very sophisticated software to actually recognize a forged signature. You guys want to take a short break? 5 minutes? Let's take a short break. Yeah.